Hey everyone, welcome back to Great Sports Debates. You spoke and I'm listening. And now we are going to do another basketball series, and I need your help this time. We established the top tier in the NBA GOAT series, and I plan to use the same criteria for what I'm going to call NBA Tier 2, or at least for right now. I've been working on this for a while, and I haven't sorted the exact list yet, so I am asking for input in the comments section on this one. For the most part, these are going to be guys who are multiple MVP types, guys that were likely the best in the league at some point, or someone that was above and beyond who maybe wasn't the best guy in the league at some point due to circumstances. But I'm going to start this series with the guy who was, in my opinion, best in the league for a short period of time, Larry Bird, as he is one of the guys that's going to be a sure thing for the Tier 2 list. As a quick reminder on the criteria, production will be first, focusing on a player's peak numbers. Domination will be next, comparing the player to their era in MVPs, All-NBA first teams, stat titles, or other records of relevance. Third will be impact. This will be measured by record change and observations on how the player helped his team in ways not necessarily measured by numbers. Fourth will be winning, which I cover in every single one of these videos. I understand this is the ultimate goal, but I'm also realizing that this is impacted by the people that the player's playing with, as well as the teams that they have to play against. There's a lot of factors when it comes to winning. This is not an individual sport. Fifth will be weaknesses, which will hit the player's weak points. And finally, I'll do a final point section where I'll hit any relevant items missed, as well as my opinions at the end. Now I know Boston fans are already flipping me off that Bird wasn't in the top tier. But if we're being real, his production and dominance wasn't quite at that level, and his peak was short. But Bird's production in his prime was pretty elite. From 84 to 88, Bird averaged 27.3 points per game, 9.8 rebounds, 6.8 assists, 1.8 steals, and 0.9 blocks on almost 50-40-90 splits of 51.2% from the field, 40% from the three, and 89.9% from the stripe. Bird also played 39.1 minutes per game over that time period with a .534 effective field goal percentage. He was better than 2-to-1 on assist-to-turnover ratio, and Larry had a 26.1 PER over this time period with 75.3 win shares and a 41.1 value over replacement player. His best marks throughout his career were 29.9 points, 11 rebounds, and 7.6 assists. Obviously, Bird was dominant over this 5-year span, winning 3 MVPs and keeping all 3 on my list, tying him for 5th most all-time by my count. Bird also led the league in PER twice, win shares twice, value over replacement player 3 times, box plus or minus 5 times, minutes twice, and free throw percentage 4 times, plus 3 other years over 90% where he wasn't the leader. Bird was a 9-time first-team player All-NBA, and that was in a row. Remember, he only played 13 years and started running into injuries in the later part of his career. He was second team once and 3-time second team All-Defense. Impact is next, and this is the spot where you maybe look at Byrd and try to make that argument for a Tier 1 type guy. Now think about this. Boston finished the 1979 season 29-53. Now during the previous draft, Boston had 2 of the top 8 picks. And if you watch my videos, you know Red Auerbach is one of the best owners and GMs ever, and did a lot of things that wouldn't happen today, whether it comes to, great trades, paying for picks, maneuvering around to try to get guys that he wanted. And as always, he took advantage of the current rules, something the NBA had to fix after this, and he picked Byrd with his first pick, deciding he would be worth the 1-year wait, as everyone knew Byrd was going back to Indiana State for his senior season. And just go ahead and maybe after this video, pull up that 1978 draft, and you can see by the players that were available, as well as the record that Boston wound up having in Byrd's first year, it was worth the wait. Boston won 32 more games, winning 61 total, with no other major changes. And of course, Byrd won Rookie of the Year in a landslide. In addition, Byrd's passing is really underrated when you consider he didn't bring the ball down a lot, and most of his passes led to open shots and free layups due to his passing ability, as well as his gravity on defense, his IQ, and how fast he would pass the ball. A lot of his passes were, touch or redirect passes, almost seeing what's going to happen before it happened. So, sometimes we get into these arguments and people talk about guys that were great passers and they start counting the assist numbers. No, those are guys that passed a lot. Larry Bird was one of the greatest passers of all time. Just, if you didn't watch him, you're not going to know, but his highlight reel of passes is different than anybody else. That's all I can really say if you didn't see him play. Bird also had a unique hustle and a will to win for a star player. And even with Bird's resume so far, the winning section might be his best. Now, I already know some people are going to shrug at 3 titles and, talk about 11 titles or 6-0 or all that stuff that we always hear. And those are valid points. But let's look at the context of everything he's going against with a loaded Showtime team. He had the 76ers in the early 80s, and then later on with the Pistons and Bulls. So this was a very tough era with, a few really dominant teams on top. And, honestly, if you look at the 90s, there's some of these teams that were nobody teams, not even as good as they were in the 80s, like the Rockets, for example, that won a couple of titles in the 90s. Clearly much better when they had, Ralph Sampson and all those guys in the mid-80s. But, they didn't do anything like they did in the 90s. And a lot of that has to do with the top teams like those early 80s 76ers teams. And then, of course, as everyone knows, Boston and LA really just owned the 80s. And it makes sense, the Lakers had a stacked squad. But, if you look at Boston, people always talk about the number of Hall of Famers. Well, look at those players and look what they did. Look what they did without Bird around. And you'll quickly see that, even just looking at the numbers, Bird did have some really, really good players on his team. But let's not act like he was teaming up with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and, Scottie Pippen and D. Wade and, all these things that we see what, people would call a super team. Larry Bird made people good. He had a high IQ. He shot excellent. He could get to the rack. He passed well. And like I said, with his anticipation, he would make good plays on defense as well. And that's proven when you look at his win percentage. which is the second highest of any player who's played 250 games or more, which is the metric they use. He won 73.58% of his games, which is just a really, really high mark, much higher than anybody that we actually had on our GOAT series. So, if you're somebody that's talking about winning all the time, look at the whole picture. If you watched during the 80s, you expected the Celtics and Lakers to win all the time for years and years and years and years. A 60-win season wasn't special. It was the standard. And when you look at this, of course, we always come back to the Bird-Magic rivalry. The guy who's actually in first place is Magic, who's ahead of Bird by less than 0.5%. So there you go. These teams weren't just the best teams, that year or for a couple of years. The Celtics dominated from day one when they drafted, when Larry Bird, not when he got drafted, but the first day he got on the court and he started playing, they were a contender. And, if it wasn't for the injuries, that might have been for a really long time. But, when we started getting the bone spurs and the ankles, and then, you throw on top of that the nerve pain, the bad back, anyone who has a bad back knows, it started to go downhill quickly from there. And just to highlight this, Bird had come back from the ankles where he got the bone spurs removed in '89. That was the first time they lost in the Eastern Conference Finals in 5 years. He comes back. Celtics are great again. They're 29-5 in the 91 season before Bird misses his second big chunk of time. This is the back issues that he started to have. And they never got back to the promised land. Bird was never the same after that. And, despite all this, there is a case against Larry. There is a reason he's not on tier 1. His career numbers are pulled downward by his short prime that we spoke of, and the late injuries in his career. Most notably, his 24 points per game career average is really good, but not special when we're looking at a list of greats. His athleticism was not great. Most of the steals and blocks were based off of anticipation, IQ, hustle, being smart. So, that could be a liability in some cases. And, his career is 13 years. And, over the course of that 13 years, he missed some chunks in the later end of that. So, overall, pretty short for someone you would consider an all-time great. Now, despite all this, Bird did everything well. And in my opinion, his defense, when healthy, was actually underrated because he wasn't as athletic. He made so many highlight plays every single game. If the Celtics were playing, Bird was going to make a big shot. He was going to make a ridiculous pass. He was going to jump in front of a passing lane at a critical time in the game. There's so much you can look at, if you watch Boston, so many big moments where he came in. He was one of those guys, if he got that open shot, you expected it to go in. Now, for my final points, I'm just going to say, people talk about this Boston roster. And Parrish and Nickal were really good players, and they were efficient, but most of it was off of the looks that Bird got them and the gravity he bought. And, nobody on that team had any kind of super great numbers. There were guys that won All-Stars, and part of that is a product of them winning 60-plus games every year. They were constantly a 60-win team with him, and when he sat and when he was out, before he got there, after he left, during injuries, the team was, north of, probably around 500 or just north of 500. So they were still good. But, like I said, Bird made this a super team. It wasn't a super team that Bird was a part of. It was Larry Bird. And like all the greats, he dominated across all levels, high school, college, and pro, and in every aspect. Maybe he didn't have the great defense of some of these other greats, but Bird did a lot of crafty stuff on defense. And like I said, that's one of the best passers I've ever seen. Great shooter, able to get to the rack. Really just did everything really well. And the last part I want to kind of hit on is people talk about the Magic-Bird rivalry. But Magic had the better supporting cast at MSU as well as in LA. And, if we're being real, that LA team should have just been winning year after year after year because they clearly had the best roster in the league. Bird was the guy scoring 30 and doing everything. Well, Magic had cost the Lakers multiple series in the playoffs in crunch time, just playing terrible when he wasn't just throwing the ball to Kareem's hand in the half court. And this isn't to say that Magic isn't a great player, because obviously he is. Just my personal opinion, one of the more overrated players in basketball. Now, I got a couple of other no-brainers that's going to be on this list, this Tier 2 list, like Shaquille O'Neal. But let me know in the comments who I'm missing, who needs to be on that list. Hell, maybe if I miss somebody on that Tier 1 list, definitely let me know that. And if you appreciate what I put together here, please like, subscribe, and tell me what I did right or wrong. I'm good with that. Just make a good solid argument. The name calling and all that, unnecessary. But thanks for watching and enjoy.